Okay, so we are ready for our keynote speaker, Dr. Richard Brecht. I've been instructed not to read his bio because it will cut into his time, so I will respect that.
Thank you
that
very
mandate.
much, Bill. Is that short enough?
That's right. Perfect.
You all have to forgive me because I'm very, very passionate about what I do. And so if I get carried away, just go like this, and I'll take a hint. I'd like to thank Bill for inviting me and Georgia State University for keeping this event open and inviting people like me and people like you. And I'd also like to thank my colleague, Rahim Charania. He just left. Rahim is a friend who does really remarkable things to graduate from Georgia State and one of the major benefactors of this institution. And had he been here, I would have asked you to thank him again. This is not going to be so much fun. I'm going to try to do something. What I believe is I'm going to talk about this bridge between education and employment, okay? And I'm going to try to talk about ways to address that non-existing bridge. And I'm going to start with trying to deepen your understanding of both sides of that bridge with data and evidence. I don't believe in anything without data and evidence. If that understanding is deepened, then we'll get the right rhetoric, we'll get the right messaging to talk to each other. Because that's the problem. Language people aren't very good at communication. We keep talking to ourselves a lot. And that's what I don't want to do here. And if we get the messaging right, then I want to end on some mechanisms that enable that messaging to succeed. And that messaging starts with lead with languages, but I want to push that now even further and show where we're going to do with that and mechanisms and so on, okay? So that's what I just said. I'm going to talk to educators and employers, and I'm going to use this kind of a metaphor. I'm not an economist, but you'll understand what I'm worried about is basically this notion of how do we handle supply and demand. Whoops. And that's very important because that's where I'm interested in whether the businesses or the employers are getting the supply they want. And I'm interested in whether the educators are getting the demand signals they need in order to provide the supply, okay? But I want to make you clear what this model does. We've done this a while. You can't have supply without demand, and you can't have demand without supply. We've always needed airbags. Pony Express riders needed airbags, okay? What happened was they were too expensive and not good enough. And in the early 90s, we got really good airbags, and all of a sudden they're required. And so it is a matter of you can't ever have people demanding something, demanding a supply if they don't believe it's there. And that's part of the bridge I want to build. Okay, and all I want to do is I want to clear the market. I want to clear the market. All I want to do is say supply now equals demand, and demand is generating supply. That's all I'm talking about today. If I follow this model, I want to specify the need for a good reason. You all know the need, but that's not good enough. You all have to have data on the need. You have to be able to express this. I want to drill down on data that actually exemplifies the need, but more importantly, turns to demand and makes that demand very clear, the need of employers. And then I want to come back to how the way educators are trying to answer that, okay? So, whoops. I don't do technology, you can tell. This is a very interesting data point in the UK. This Baroness Cousins, this is the all-party parliamentary group for modern languages. The UK losing 50 billion pounds a year. By the way, UK is 1/5. multiply 5 times that in pounds, turn it to dollars, and that's a reasonable expectation about real losses in this economy, pure economic losses, okay, which is a very interesting concept. And the Brits, they did a major, the British Academy did a major study of language, major initiative for 5 years, and they got data and activities like the languages we'll talk about. So 1 in 4 or 1 in 6 U.S. companies operating internationally, they lost business opportunities because of this, okay? I don't have to talk about, people write these expressions all the time. It's interesting. It's Forbes, it's 2017, okay? Everybody knows that businesses are taking action to get these employees, businesses with multilingual teams, with multilingual teams seeing a positive impact, such as improved reputation, and employees reap the benefit of improved performance, confidence, and increased engagement. All of this stuff people are asserting all day. It's not hard to find assertions of this. And by the way, it's really interesting. It's not only business. Look at the government need. It's very interesting. It's a recent article and book. There's a cost to self-reinforcing cycle of militarizing U.S. foreign policy. That's what's happening, right? The Department of Defense is taking over basic issues like agrarian reform, rule of law, economic development. If you think our military has those capabilities, you're wrong. And just look at that expansion of need, even in the U.S. government. Let's talk now about more data. Now I want to talk about this. Here is a survey. It's of 836 U.S. companies, okay? And approximately, and there are 20 other, and these slides will be available and so on. There are 20 other studies. And it's basically that you can see that, say, almost half of these companies, the next 10 years proportion of total revenue will be greater. That's not a surprise. Everyone's saying that. How about a close study now of this demand? The latest study, which you've seen part of it, but I'm going to show you the rest of it, the rest of the story. That basically you see, if you pull out your lovely, I don't have it here. Yes, I do. This, and you see that wonderful illustration that Bill referred to, okay? And it's that, wait a minute. It's this one, okay? And it's basically saying, if you look at this, it basically says this is a survey of 2,100 companies, the HR people, the hiring people, okay? 2,100 companies in the U.S. And by the way, we have another one of APEC countries, which is almost the same, and I'll show it to you. That 33% of mid-size and large-size company say they need have international operations or multilingual, multicultural operations, domestically and so on. By the way, 10% of Americans don't speak language. That's true, with all due respect. 23% of Americans in this country speak a language other than English at home. 23%. Okay, of all the people, they represent the total number of people who speak a language well in this country, which says something about our education system. 93% of these middle and large-sized companies, they need employees who are able to work with customers and clients from a range of different countries and cultures. That's a good number, okay? And so if then 64% seek employees, it's all in that slide there, 64% seek employees with multicultural experience, overseas experience. Look at the bottom number. That's not on your page. The bottom number, 11% actively seek foreign language skills. And they'll take it if they can get it, but they do not actually pursue it. What we have is what I call, this is a demonstration of someone recognizing a very large itch. This is a demonstration of someone who doesn't know where to scratch. We have a good idea, the need, the presence of all of this. We seem to know exactly, we need multicultural people. We need people with experience abroad. We need all of that stuff. Yeah, if they have language, it'd be okay. The connection between language and all of that other stuff is generally not understood by these companies. 2,100, 11%. Now, and so let me show you, and I'm going to bore down a little bit because this is what I meant by understanding the demand. The demand side is all of you who have employees, who need employees, this demand side from this survey. Look at this. The small companies really want language. We require language. They need it. The big companies, not so much. I can tell you why. They probably do outsourcing. But that's another issue. But look at this number. Here's a way to look at these companies, the demand by economic sector. And you have agriculture, retail, trade, education. These are the kinds of data we need to know, the educators need to know. What are companies? What are the companies? What are the domains people are looking for? And look, if you say, look at the number, identify skills. They look at the level of competence. They note L1 competence. They talk about multilingual advantage, but look at what then they require. Look who requires language. You've got information services at 10%, 21% administrative service. I have no idea what that means. Health and social, that's exactly what, well, that's what happens with surveys. People write surveys and then you find out all they did was raise more questions than they answered. But at least here are the first real data on economic sector and the demand of economic sector. And this is what universities have to understand. We have to burrow in on this demand. So here's another. This is by job category. Here's another piece of information. If you're designing programs, and so these are by job category, and here we go again, these are translators, interpreters. They better have foreign language skills. We're just hoping, but I'm a little surprised only 84% do. Watch your translator and interpreter. It's all I got to tell you. At least, but look, project managers and sales, marketing. Of course, you expect this kind of stuff, and so on. Vendor management. Who ever heard of vendor management? I don't even know what that means. But whatever it is, there it is, and so on. But here, and so all I'm trying to show is you can actually burrow down into the demand side. That's what we need to do. And this is demand by field of study, which is also interesting. So here we go again. Agriculture, 10%, believe it or not. And arts and humanities, of course, and so on. And social services, of course. But here are, again, categories that, at least in this survey, were isolated and queried. And so for the first time, you start getting an idea of what the demand is here. What is the demand? Okay? And we know the demand is for experience abroad and recognition of some language, but not actively recruiting language. Okay, so the question is, if this is clear, then why is language a nice to have instead of a need to have? Okay? That's a question every educator should figure out, because it's for us to figure that out. The businesses don't have to figure that out. I'll talk a little bit in a minute about that. But here is it because English is quite enough? If you have English, so if you have some language around, it's okay. But if you have English and a good set of outsourced, you have language service providers, you're good to go. Or is it possibly because nobody believes that there's a supply to meet that demand? And here comes my Pony Express and my airbags. If there's no sense that supply is there and it's available at a reasonable cost and a high effectiveness, it's a good commodity you can purchase when you need it and want it. If that's not present, there's not going to be a demand. I'm guaranteeing you. Let's talk about World English just for a moment. a very interesting statistic. Those numbers in red represent a test score given to hundreds of thousands of people across the world on English. A number of 60 would make you basically able to, it would be an intermediate mid or high in our scale. Okay? Which means if you talk about a topic you know a lot about and it's personal and so on, you'll be able to basically communicate. Look at what's happening. This is, if everyone thinks English is the answer to our problem, look at the numbers. That basically the Asian average, the Asian average is well under 60. China, by the way, in this Asian is 50. That basically, it's not saying, by the way, that you can't get English expertise in those countries. It's saying if you think you're going to mount a workforce in that country that's going to speak English, you got another thing coming. If you think you're going to market on the basis of English or anything, you have another thing coming. This is the global competence in every country, in every education system that's teaching English. Okay, and so, and by the way, Europe is somewhat of a surprise. It's because the Scandinavian countries, the number is 80 or 90. However, in Bulgaria, not so much, and so on, and that's why European numbers is down. But the Middle East and so on is a problem for English. If you think English is the solution. What do we produce in language ability in this country? Our normal, after 4 years of a language program in this country, is the same as the global ones. An intermediate mid, which means if you know the topic and you know who you're talking to, you can roughly get your idea across. We do not, as a rule, and this number, this kind of on a scale of 1 to 5, this is a 1.5 or something, or 2-ish. That's our number. That's what we're producing in this country, okay? And that's the number output, the gross output of our education system already for 30 or 40 years. That hasn't changed at all, in spite of everything else. But that's all the bad news. Now, you see, I've shifted to the supply side. Now, you've got a good idea what the demand side, well, I have, anyhow, the demand side. Now I want to come to the supply side a lot, and that supply side with that low number we're turning out is embarrassing. But there are remarkable things, what employers have to understand, there are remarkable things happening in education in the United States, language education in the United States, okay? Right now, what I'm proposing, what we've talked about now, university language programs are about to be hit with a bow wave, not to say a tsunami, of graduates from elementary, secondary programs, which are better skilled, more diverse, and more hungry and ambitious for language than anyone they've seen in the past decades. This is a bow wave hitting it. Where's the bow wave coming? There's things called dual language immersion programs. And those of you who know that, that's where the programs, the curriculum is taught in 2 languages. And in this country, dual language programs are exploding all over this country. There are hundreds and thousands of them growing. They're spreading like wildfire right at this time. It's a little problematic because we're not sure the control and so on. But these kids are graduating from dual language programs at the same level that our university people are. But they're graduating from 9th grade and 10th grade and 11th grade, okay? And in these programs, okay? There's one of the best things going on in our country is the seal of biliteracy. 25 states in this country now certifying the language ability, the bilingual language ability of people in their system. And for the first time now, that's an incentive and it's a recognition which has not happened before in this way. And that's a remarkable development now. That's part of the bow wave. And 23 states now give credit for competence in high school. That wherever, if you learned it from at your mother's knee, or if you learned it abroad because you were in the military, or wherever you learned it, you can get credit in high school. 23 states now. So you can move further in the system. They don't send you back to Russian 1. Higher education. There is good news in higher education as well. The Language Flagship Program, this is a program now, 25 universities around the country turning out people actually at the professional level. 3, instead of 1+, there are 3. If you're a 3 level in a language, you actually can practice the language professionally. And we have 25 institutions now really pushing that. We're turning out, with heritage speakers, 4s, almost native speakers in these programs now. And this is happening. So there is, from the point of view of supply now, you're seeing, and you'll see in the next 10 years, in the next decade, an incredible increase in the supply, both in numbers and in quality of people who can actually handle language and culture. And by the way, we've just started something else called Plus. And I invite Georgia State to think about this. And so on. What this is we're now for the first time starting a process to accredit language education programs in the United States, where language education programs have to announce to their students, the parents, faculty, and everyone, these are our outcomes we're aiming for. These are the qualifications on our faculty. And we will be certified, we will be accredited according to those. We will be transparent and accountable. And right now, the American Association of Teachers of different languages are now exploring this in probably now about 12 languages. That accreditation, actually telling people, holding people accountable, this is what you're going to get if you come here, and this is what we're going to and we're going to tell you, we're going to test it, and we're going to know. That everyone in the demand side has to love, because it's what do you call it in advertising? Truth. I want to talk about one other thing. Your association with supply is, we've just talked about language. There's something now that the research in the labs and everything, and everyone knows, it's all the rage now. I call it the bilingual bonus. We now have data, rigorous data from end of tens of thousands, that basically, if you use 2 languages regularly, I didn't say how much you knew, I said if you use 2 languages regularly, and this was done in a major study in Southern California, bilingual Hispanics compared to monolingual English speakers graduate from high school more, get into college more, graduate from college more, get better jobs at higher salaries. Other than that, there's no advantage to bilingualism. Think about that for a minute. And think about, by the way, when you think about that, what are the obstacles stopping all of our bilingual people, friends in this country, from actually beating out everybody else? What are the social factors that make that advantage go away? But you can see it now. We're seeing it in Southern California. When you have equal access and you have that ability and you have those 2 languages, that's what dual language immersion is aimed for, to keep those 2 languages. We don't try to get rid of one while we're adding English. We keep them both. And those advantages, and so not only that, but in dual language immersion, we have seen now with a rigorous study in Portland that if these kids in dual language immersion, whatever their English or whatever their first and second languages are, English or another language, by 8th grade, they're 1 academic year ahead in literacy skills. By 8th grade. Think about that. What we have now is, it's not language because you have a girlfriend or a boyfriend, or you're enchanted by Gaudi. It's about educational achievement. Think about that as a branding notion of what we have here. And if you're an employer and you need someone in language, you get, what do you get? The bilingual bonus, which by the intellectual goes through all of those, and employment. Why? I'm missing a slide. Oh, there. This is what happens when you have two languages in your brain. You have to be using two languages. You can't just know one and theory. You have to use two languages. If you have two languages, they're both in the same spot of your brain. What you have to do is inhibit your native one and focus on the new one, and you switch back and forth all the time. And that's what an executive function is. That's how you solve problems. You solve problems by not looking at the solution everyone else has or lack of. You look at something, you inhibit the normal garden path, and you switch to someplace else. That's what creative thinking is. You look at what everyone else is doing, you inhibit that, and you focus someplace else. So that ability, that linguistic ability to switch it, because all of this thinking and processing and creative thinking and language use the same neuronal mechanisms. So what you get, if you're hiring for a language, you get a bilingual bonus. You get critical and creative thinkers. By the way, if you want critical and creative thinkers, hire bilinguals, and you get a language as a bonus. Ain't that a deal? This is, just to give you an example, Erasmus. Erasmus, I forget the N on this. Somebody knows, something like 80,000. 80,000 students, 146 countries, 1,000 employers, roughly 800 employers, okay? These are the data. 92% of these employers are looking for transversal skills. You know what those are? We call them soft skills, not so soft skills, creative and critical thinking. Okay? That's what they're looking for. That's what they're looking for. When these students, Erasmus is a program that sends the European students, university students all over Europe for a year. When they come back on a test of soft skills, they have increased those soft skills by 52%. Why? Because they've been forced to inhibit their natural cultural instincts and their natural language and to focus on the other. They are switching all the time from what they normally believe, see, understand, to something they have to face is new. And guess what? The results are there. And these numbers are, I'm not just blowing smoke with an N of 10. I'm blowing smoke with an N of 80,000. Okay, now I'll start winding up here. I know. Implication for business. Employers may sense they have a need, right? But if they can't express that need in terms of actual demand, we will never know exactly what you need, okay? And these demand signals, we need to know the specific tasks that these multilingual employees have to do. And then we have to get those demand signals somehow into the academic, into the educator's hands, so we get much more specific and understanding of what's going on. And then we have to also add the appreciation of the bilingual advantage to that. Employers need to know that these are remarkable employees. They have the potential, if they actually can use two languages, and they do, they have the potential to be among their most creative. Example, I work for an organization just north of the Beltway in DC. I did, and it has three letters. The first one is N, the last one is A, and I think there's an S in the middle, and something like that. And this organization years ago came to a center that we founded to help them. And they said, we have a problem. By 2025, 25% of our analysts are going to be Latino. And I looked at them and said, that means you will have 25% increase potential for doing analysis in your business. If you understand that critical and creative thinking is what analysts are supposed to do. Yeah. If you get all of that, then you guys have to figure out what capacity is. Do you own it or do you lease it? Do you employ them or do you outsource? right? And do you make them or do you buy them? Those are decisions, by the way, and if I recommend this study, What's Your Language Strategy? It's by Neely and Kaplan at Harvard Business School. And this is What's Your Language Strategy? They lay out for a corporation, for a business, what their company's global talent management and vision is. They lay out a strategy for the whole company so that you define your lingua franca, you define your language, your local language needs and your marketing or whatever your needs are and sales and so on. This is every good company, the big ones, and so are the little ones. If you look at this article and you understand now, in this world, you need a language strategy. Implication for educators. We need to understand these needs, but not just as rhetorical flourishes. We need to understand these needs. We have to understand the tasks and the contexts that these tasks are performed in by transnational global employers, the domestic services for the 63 million people in this country who speak languages other than English at home, and for the language service providers. These are the translators and interpreted companies that are growing by an average of 8% a year, representing $15 billion in this GDP in the country right at the moment, the language service. You need to understand those guys in detail. It's all about clearing the market, okay? Through messaging and mechanism. I'll finish with the mechanism. In my view, it's advocacy, and Marty talked about the Academy, National Academy of Arts and Sciences, this new study. This new study is now complete, and we're putting together with Marty and others a working group to not just let this sit, but to mobilize all the sectors, the government, industry, heritage, academe, and NGO, into implementing recommendations like we need more teachers, we need more partnerships, we need partnerships with business and all, we need to work with our heritage communities, we need to work with our indigenous communities, and we need to get more people abroad. If that's what's going on, and so this effective, and if we get this, if we take this mechanism, and then we understand for the first time clearly how do we construct this messaging based on our knowledge of both sides of the equation. Marty's leading it with Lead with Languages, without question. There are other efforts now to try to hone this message for different constituencies and so on. And that's what we're working with in different ways, okay? And most importantly, and I'll say this, I'll really rag you now, is extending the language brand. The language brand is just not about language. It's about equal access to educational achievement and attainment. For the first time in the inner cities, just what this university is doing, these gold mine of bilinguals, we have to maintain them, we have to build them, because it's equal access to attainment and achievement in this country. That's what language is about now. And it's also about jobs. It's about jobs. And it's not about foreign language learning. It's not about language learning. It's about bilingual language acquisition. We want to make people bilingual. We're not turning people into English speakers. It's all about bilingualism now. So we join the rest of the world, the 85, 90% of the world who are bilingual, and we're the only ones who are holding out. Australia's joined us and holding out. New Zealand. One other thing. There's a new brand. I have a problem now. I don't accept foreign language. We rejected that. We now call them world languages. I got news for you. They're America's languages. America's languages. What are America's languages? There are our indigenous languages, which we almost destroyed and are trying now. They're trying desperately to revive. They are our colonial languages. That's called English, Spanish, and Portuguese. There are our immigrant languages. That's called German and all the rest of them. And if that's not covered, there are world languages. Those are the languages that our students want that aren't the other ones. And there are even our education languages, American Sign Language, Ancient Greek and German, and Latin and so on. My point is, they're not foreign languages. People, this is what our country was built on. They're not world languages. They're our languages. They're America's languages. Now, you can't brand them. This is an American Languages Department. People think it's English. Nevertheless, when you talk about it, remember, list all the America's languages. Include them all. They all deserve the support. That's why this report of the Commission is entitled America's Languages. The mechanisms, we've had mechanisms, state road maps, and one of my favorite is what I call now U-double, Urban Dialogue for Business and Language. U-double. That's what we're going on here, by the way. Industry organizations, we're in contact with English, whether it's the Chamber, whether it's a business roundtable, whether it's Rotary International and so on. We're working with the business organizations to build mechanisms. We don't have the mechanism to keep that bridge and that common, communication and understanding going both ways. So we define our terms, define our rhetoric, message right, and deliver and through these mechanisms. And language organizations and universities like this one. The Atlanta Advantage. What a great opportunity. And I know you're taking advantage of it. You have a new associate provost who won't forget that. We have a dean who understands that. We have a chair and colleagues who get that immensely now. What an opportunity you have. And the cyber culture, the global education meeting, and everything you're doing, all I can say is just keep leaning on that elephant. It's wonderful. Thank you very much.